From 3 until 13 I lived in a nice home out near Yosemite National Park, nothing super spectacular about it. 4 bedrooms, a den, dining room, the norm. Just down a little dirt road and, if you've ever been around those parts you'll know, miles away from civilization. My whole childhood I was visited by this girl in white. She never spoke. I would just wake up at night and see or feel her there. I asked my dad and his response every time was the men in our family can see ghosts. My rationale of this, I'm a skeptic, I remain that to this day, but the story I'm telling made me question, was that we had some sort of mild schizophrenia running through our family. It didn't bother me, she didn't look like other people. There was something off about her. After my father died, my mother decided to sell the house and went through a realtor. We never once had contact with the buyers, only knew them by name. The buyers had a son who went to the same school as our old neighbors, dear friends of the family, and the son apparently came to school without sleep repeatedly, complaining that there was a girl who watched him at night and that he needed to get out. Ugh, shivers up my spine every time I remember this. I am the eldest of 3 siblings, and of course as we moved house to house I got the basement bedroom most times. I was fine with this being the eldest, this let me have privacy. The last home I lived in with my family before I moved out on my own I spent 5 years in the basement bedroom. Through those 5 years I experienced amazing night terrors and sleep paralysis on a very regular basis. There were a few incidents where I would wake up and the closet on the far side of the room would be open just a crack, and I'd stare at it knowing I had closed it, and it would creak open just a touch more, then after what would seem like hours slowly close and click shut, not a slam, not a regular door close, a very slow methodical one, if that makes sense. On 2 specific nights I woke up, not suddenly like something jarred me, but just kind of rolled over and at the foot of my bed saw a girl standing there. She looked very young, black hair, dark dress, and she did not move, didn't make a sound, and I never could make out a face. Both times I reverted immediately back to being 5 years old and hid my face under the sheets while my heart rate went full marathon pace. Eventually I would feel like it wasn't there anymore and I'd peek out and it would be gone. My parents are not believers in anything paranormal and I never told them anything thinking they would think I'm crazy. I chalked it up to night terrors and extraordinarily realistic dreams during paralysis. I moved out and far away. My next sibling in line got the coveted adult room in the basement and life went on. I had a few Christmas visits and other holiday runs, and at one point I remember going into that room to get a chair and seeing the closet door nailed shut from the outside. I didn't question it as I thought there's no way it's related to my experience. Not long after that, on another return visit home, I went and checked the door to that closet. The nails were gone but in place was a padlock and there was clearly bundles of sage/sweetgrass hanging above the closet and above the only exterior window in. I worked up the nerve to ask my mom what's the deal with the basement, and she reluctantly told me that my brother had seen things come in and out of the closet and that he had a girl appear beside his bed and terrorize him on several occasions. Now, no joke, I still haven't told them what I saw because I don't want them to have to move or be bothered with their basement over this. They are both retired, all kids have moved out, and they seem happy. They have also since gutted and renovated the whole basement. I've stayed there a few times now with my wife and nothing has happened. TLDR, basement bedroom growing up is either haunted or has some environmental thing going on in it to cause night terrors, and more than just me. The only one I have is when I was in 4th grade. When I was little, I would always sleep with my door open. I went through a phase where I would wake up between 3 o'clock/4:00 a.m. every night, and every single night I would hear footsteps walking up my stairs, around my living room, through my dining room, across my kitchen and down my hallway. They would always stop right before my doorway, then turn around and go back into the basement. But one night they didn't stop. What I saw was a shadow of a little girl/boy, couldn't tell, walk right in front of my doorway, look at me for a few seconds, then it walked away, back down the stairs. I slept with the door closed the next night. So I've never posted this because I always get to these threads way too late. So I get home from my job as a server at midnight. One of my roommates was in the Navy and was deployed at the time, and the other one was at his girlfriend's house. I cook myself dinner, and as I'm cooking my dog starts growling and barking towards the middle of the room at nothing. This is especially weird because she never, ever barks. She was a rescue and I bought her as a sense of security when I'm home alone. I'm a female, and I could never get her to bark at anyone. I dismiss her barking as odd, but I finish cooking and eat. I start to clean and turn the sink on because it takes forever to get hot, but right when I turned around the sink turned off on its own. Again, I think it's odd, but I don't really think it's worth freaking out over. The hair on the back of my dog is standing up straight, but no one is home and it's midnight, so I figure I'd just tough it out, even though I was beginning to get a little spooked. After cleaning, I go in the bathroom and sit on the sink to pluck my eyebrows. My bathroom was small, with the sink immediately to your right as you enter, with the toilet next to it, bathtub at the end, and toilet paper dispenser directly across the toilet. It was a really narrow room so you could reach the TP while sitting on the toilet. So the way I was sitting, the toilet paper dispenser was behind me. After 2 to 3 minutes I hear a weird noise behind me, so I turn around and I shit you not, the whole roll of toilet paper was unraveling fast as fuck, like someone was pulling it. I noped the fuck out of that bathroom. The door was closed and it had no windows, so it couldn't have been a breeze. I put a leash on my dog and ran out of that apartment faster than Usain Bolt. By the time this happened it was already around 2 a.m. None of my friends were awake, so I spent the night sitting outside of the door to my apartment. When I went back in the next morning, the whole roll of toilet paper was on the ground, and the roll was probably 3/4 full. I'm talking about a good 5 to 10 meters of toilet paper. After that day I never had an odd experience quite like that one ever again, but one of my roommates did mention that a few times he'd come home and find every door and cabinet in the place open, when he'd specifically remembered closing them and leaving them that way when he left. This was when I was on vacation out of state, and our other roommate was still deployed. I've posted this before, but what the hey? Okay, this may take a bit of doing, so bear with me. Army base, Zost, West Germany, as was. A still, dark, autumn evening, must have been warm because it was the kind of temperature you don't notice. Me, 13, and a mate, 15, just dossing around before I had to go in. Behind the flats where we live was a green area with a play area. Only one street light, so it was very dark compared to our street in the well-lit main route through the camp, which was about 80 to 100 meters away from where walking. No traffic, nothing. It was never busy, and this was on a weekend evening, so literally, no traffic and no one out and about as far as we could tell. Which suited 2 teenagers just fine, thanks. Bear with me, this is important. So, we're heading between our respective blocks of flats and into the darkened park area. And we stopped dead. On the main road, moving right to left, was a figure. Vaguely person-shaped, but undulating and waving like cloth underwater. It glided along the middle of the road. Based on what it obscured behind it as it moved, I'd estimate it to be between 8 to 10 foot. But at the very least it was larger than average man size. This shape, this thing, was not walking. There was none of the slight up and down motion of walking. It just glided, smoothly, at a fast walking pace, I'd guess. And it was black. Not someone wearing black clothes black. It was a hole cut into the night. No reflections, no shadows or shades. Just blackness. It seemed like a lifetime as I soaked this detail up. In reality it couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 seconds. I whispered, breathed, "Do you see that?" My friend, in a whisper, replied, "Yes." And the fucking thing changed direction. Towards us. The last image I have, before we broke and ran, was of it rising up as it came over the curb. This is what makes it real for me. This is something that had mass, that obeyed at least something of the physical world. It moved from the brightly lit road into the same darkness in which we stood. We broke and ran for our lives. Back onto our street and into my mate's block. The fucker then bolted back to his own home, leaving me wondering how the hell I was going to get to my block. After a while, the fear of the repercussions from my dad for being late and overrode my fear of what might be out there, in the night. So I ran, straight ahead, the 10 or so meters to my own front door. I was in too much trouble for being late to ever say anything when I got home. Sometimes, when I'm walking and the night is warm and still and quiet, I think about it and I wonder what I'd do if I ever saw it again. Run away? Or face it down and maybe solve a 30-year-old mystery? Honestly, I just don't know. We moved into a house and everything was really quiet the first 6 months or so. The neighbors told us that the people who lived there before had moved after their teenage son died in a motorcycle accident. Then after that first 6 months my dad died, not in the house. After that, stuff started to happen. I would have friends sleep over and one night my friend woke me up because she said there was a young guy standing in my bathroom. So I went and checked and nothing was there. Over the next few years just about any friends that stayed overnight had said they saw the tall blonde young guy walking around the house. We did have a few other things happen, like a wine glass was on the counter and it broke. No one was touching it, it just shattered on the counter. Another time during the winter we had a heater on and my room was always the warmest in the house and it was ice cold as you walked across my bedroom to the bathroom that was connected. The creepiest thing was when my boyfriend was sleeping on the couch in the middle of the night and he said he woke up to a young guy pushing him off onto the floor. He said the guy didn't say anything, but my boyfriend at the time knew that he had to leave and he did. He wouldn't stay at my place after that. Edit: I have gotten a lot of crap about the wine glass, so I will explain in better detail. My mom had a huge collection of glassware, she had so many there wasn't anywhere to put it anymore. So we just set them on the counter. The wine glass had been sitting there for a long time. No one had touched it. It hadn't just come out of the dishwasher or anything like that. Basically she bought it, put it on the counter and never touched it again. When it broke no one was near it, only me and my mom were there and we were both at least 10 feet away. Could it have been something like a crack in the glass? Maybe, but at the time it startled us and we thought it was weird. I was just sharing one of the many things that happened. This is one of 2 paranormal experiences I've had that I have a hard time wrapping my head around. It's a long read but worth it. I've suffered from insomnia as far back as I can remember. I was in 2nd grade and it was really early in the morning, I think around 5 or so. I had a little TV on my nightstand and was definitely watching LOTR on VHS. I had the volume up super loud because my ceiling fan always made a ruckus throughout the night. I was super into the movie when all of the sudden all of the sound around me started to slowly fade away. I remember I became confused and reached to turn my TV up thinking it had broken, but then I realized the sound of the fan had faded with it. The only way I can describe it is comparing it to someone turning the volume down on a car radio. I was suddenly overwhelmed by an intense feeling of euphoria. I have never experienced anything like it. I absolutely cannot describe how utterly at peace I felt. I was able to comprehend what was happening, and then it clicked in my head that I was dying. Keep in mind that I'm in 2nd grade, so this is a pretty intense conclusion, but I just knew. I rolled over onto my back ready to, and excited to accept my fate. That was when I saw it. There was a large white figure in my doorway, just hovering, and pulsating a white aura. I quickly panicked, and began calling out for my brother. His room was across the hall. The figure glided to the end of my bed and just sat there, watching. I'm not really sure how much time passed, but the figure suddenly vanished, sound came back, and the euphoria disappeared. I jumped out of bed and ran into my brother's room where I practically flew into his bed. He woke up and when he saw how panicked I was he began to panic as well. I was hysterical and just kept telling him it was a ghost. We did what any other kids would do and hid under the covers. After a while we got anxious, and I bravely made a peephole in the blanket to check the time on the clock, hoping that it would be daylight soon. 5:30, the clock read 5:30 in the morning. Then the phone rang, and it rang, and rang, and rang. Me and my brother started to panic even more, then silence. Once again it began to ring, and ring, and ring. We jumped out of bed and took turns running from light switch to light switch until we had a light path to the living room. Our house was 5,000 plus square foot. This was not an easy task. We got to the living room and watched cartoons until my mom woke. She was livid, yelling at us for being up so early. I told her I saw a ghost, which only made her more upset. My brother, who was always tormenting my irrational fears, got mad at her and started telling her this wasn't a joke and it wasn't my imagination. I started telling her to check the phone, because I saw the ghost around 5:30 and it must have been the ghost calling, kid logic. She went to check the phone and went to the other room for a while. Suddenly she wasn't upset anymore. When we asked if it was said ghost, she said it was a telemarketer. She was so nice about it, she let me sleep in her room the next few days. I thought maybe since it was my brother's birthday that day that she just didn't want to argue, but she never let me sleep in her room. I got home from school on the 15th, I saw the ghost in the early hours on the 13th. My mom called me to the family room and told me to sit in her lap and that she needed to tell me something. I obliged. My great-grandma passed away in the hospital at 5:30 a.m. and the phone calls were my grandma calling to notify us. Me and great-grandma were extremely close. To this day I get chills thinking about it. I know that there are a few ways to explain the occurrence, but I know for a fact that it was 100% a paranormal experience. My and brother still back me up on it today. Okay, I've got a good one. I'm not usually one that believes in the paranormal, but this made me question everything. My girlfriend had always told me her house was haunted. I'd always hear creaks and stuff upstairs and the occasional footstep, but I always played it off as normal house noises until one night in August of this year. We were downstairs watching TV like usual, about to go to bed when we both got a very weird feeling almost simultaneously. She gave me a weird look and I didn't think anything of it, so we went to bed. After a few minutes of her on Twitter and me on Reddit, we put our phones down and roll over to go to sleep. Then we both heard the words "good night" in a child's voice. Doesn't seem too strange, right? Well, considering there weren't children in the house, we both looked at each other like, why would you say good night like that? Then we realized neither of us had said it and we left her room fairly quickly. We went downstairs to lay on the couch and watch a little TV and come to our senses and figure out where those words could have come from. Then we both got that someone's watching you feeling. Not like, oh, that dude over there has been staring at me, but a something will not take their eyes off me no matter what I do feeling. So we decided it best to leave the house. We went to walk out the front door, but right as we were about to open it, we heard the child's voice again. This time it came from the balcony right above us in the entryway. Clear as day, a child said, "Mommy and Daddy." We looked at each other. I may or may not have screamed, and we ran to my car and decided to drive to the one place that was open in our shitty small Oregon town. Walmart. The problem was, as soon as we got in the car, we knew something had come with us. And it was pissed at us for leaving. The second we got into my Honda, there was nothing but the feeling of hate instilled into both of us for no reason whatsoever. Whatever it was filled that car with hate. It's now about 4 a.m. and I have to be at work in 5 hours, so we decide to go back to her house and try to get some sleep and see what happens. We walk into the front door and nothing but quiet. We walk up the stairs, turn right, and suddenly it sounds like a dog is growling from her upstairs bathroom. It takes me a second though, because I grew up with dogs and all I could think was that it was just mine and they're being weird. 5 seconds later I realize I'm at her house and no dog has ever set paw in there. Something was fucking growling at me and I had no idea what. At this point I'm fucking pissed at whatever is happening because I'm tired and need to sleep for work. So I come up with this brilliant plan of talking to shit to whatever causing all these problems. The only thing that sticks out at this point is me yelling, "If you're so pissed, so something about." Right after that I feel something pull my shirt. I turn around thinking my girlfriend is playing a very unfunny joke on me, but no. She was still downstairs. Something pulled my shirt. After that I decided it was time to leave for the night. At 6 a.m., we get in my car and drive to my mom's house. That car ride was much less hate-filled and all the bad feelings were gone for a while. I went to work while my girlfriend slept at my mom's place, and when I got off we went back to her house to check things. Everything seemed fine except for the one picture of us she had hanging on her wall was knocked to the ground like something out of a fucking horror movie. But she was too exhausted to care about my safety at that point, and I was so tired I was willing to let whatever was there kill just so I could get some rest. 2 weeks later we moved out and haven't had any problems since. I never believed in the paranormal at all until this happened. I still question it. My brain thinks there has to be a logical explanation to all of it, and I'm sure there is, but I know she believes, and a piece of me believes that there's something else in that house. This is my first ever post on Reddit. It seems so cliché to start by saying I don't believe in ghosts, but that's where I'm coming from. Here goes. A few years ago I moved into an old one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. This was the first time I had moved into my own place, and it was nice to not have crappy stealing roommates. The apartment block, which only had 8 units, was built in the 1930s. It was moldy and the rent was interestingly cheap. The first few months go by without a hiccup and I'm enjoying living in this place. I come home from work one day and I go into my bathroom. Something catches the corner of my vision. The board which covers the manhole on the ceiling, that has access to the small attic space, is broken in 2 pieces on the ground. I remember standing there for about 2 minutes trying to make sense of it. I examined the 2 broken bits of wood. The wooden board is about an inch thick and would have taken Bruce Lee to break it in half. My initial thought is that the landlord may have sent an electrician around without informing me, and they might have been working in the attic space and broken the board, if that makes sense. But the more I think about it, the less likely that scenario seems. Anyway, I take a couple of pictures and email them to the landlord asking if anyone was in the property that day, with an undertone of me being a bit pissed off that she didn't tell me. I receive a reply at around 7:30 a.m. the next morning. Her email reads, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I was worried, thinking shit, someone has broken in. I call her and she explains that her last 2 tenants said the exact same thing happened to them amongst other things, and she will send someone around to replace the wooden board. If I wasn't so busy with work I would have thought more of it. I lay awake at night for the next few weeks thinking what the fuck caused the board to break in half, and my first conclusion is that someone was living up there in the tiny attic space of this apartment, which seemed very unlikely. About a month later I wake up suddenly around 4 a.m., which is very unusual. I have so many goosebumps it feels like someone is rubbing their hands on me. Everything is silent for ages, but then I hear this weird sound coming from the roof above my bed. It's this dragging sound. Like someone is pulling a sack of potatoes along the floor. I freak the fuck out and I'm frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I think. There's no way a possum would make that sound. After about 5 minutes of listening to this intermittent dragging sound, I work up enough courage to turn on the light and walk into the bathroom where the manhole is, armed with the cricket bat I keep next to my bed. The new board covering the manhole is broken in 2 pieces again. I felt sick. I turn on the bathroom light and stare at the black space where the cover on the manhole would be. As tough as I like to think I am, I'm 100% frozen with fear. The dragging sound has stopped. But there's another sound. There's a whispering. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me at first, but the whispering was clear. It was coming from the fucking attic. Please let me stress at this point that I'm not making any of this up. The whispering sounds like children's voices. It's gibberish mostly, but there's one sentence that I can make out. It's your turn, it's your turn. It keeps repeating. I turn on every single light in the apartment as well as the TV, to try and make things feel normal. It's about 5 a.m. and it's still dark outside because it's the middle of winter. I'm watching TV to try and unwind. Then fuse blows and everything goes silent. My pet Budgie in my kitchen, who never makes a sound at night time, starts squawking like he's being strangled. I've never heard him make these sorts of noises, he's literally screaming. I grab my car keys and run the fuck out of my apartment and go sit in my car. I wait until the sun comes up. People are now walking their dogs and starting their day, and this comforts me enough to go back into my apartment. The front door is open, but I don't think too much of it because I figure I booked it out of there so fast that I didn't close it. Everything seems normal and I go into the kitchen to check on Dexter, my pet Budgie. He's not in his cage, what the fuck. I let him out most days to fly around, but there is 100% no way of his getting out unless someone lets him out. I start to feel sick again. I look around everywhere but can't see him. All the windows are closed and the wire mesh screen door at the front door was closed when I came up. I open the door to the bathroom, again, I open the door to the bathroom and I can hear a splashing sound. Poor little Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I take him out. Wash him and dry him off. I thought he was going to die because he was breathing in water. I was so confused. The only logical explanation is that someone did this. At about 8 a.m. I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of what had happened. "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. "I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months, I only moved out 3 months ago. I heard the whispering again on a few occasions and twice the manhole cover moved but wasn't broken. The landlord called me last week. She sounded embarrassed and said that the new tenants, a young Japanese couple, had begged to speak with me about some of the shit that has been going on there. Fuck that. It's their problem now." I shared this story before in a similar thread. One night when I was 10, I was asleep in bed and was woken up by my bedroom door opening, then someone sitting on my bed. I felt the graze on my leg and the bed sink as they sat. Thinking it was my mom having something to tell me, I opened my eyes only to see a pale, eyeless, just black empty sockets, boy who seemed to be my age sitting at the foot of my bed with his legs crossed staring at me, or facing my direction since he had no eyes. He then reached his hand toward me and he was holding what looked like a little black box. I was freaked out, but as I reached to grab it, he hesitantly pulled back. I reached out further for it and said, "Give it." As I did so, I blinked, and by the time I reopened my eyes, he was gone. The spot of the bed where was sitting lifted back into place, but the imprint of someone sitting there was still present. I told my mom in the morning and she was slightly freaked but assured me I was just dreaming. Fast forward 5 years. I had my girlfriend over to do homework. After homework she took a nap while she waited for her parents to pick her up. When they arrived, I tried waking her to let her know. I nudged her, and she opened her eyes so sudden, already looking in the direction of the corner of the room where the wall meets the ceiling, lifting her finger and pointed. And as fast as she woke, she fell asleep again. I attempted to wake her again. She came to full consciousness, and I asked her what the hell that was about and explained what she just did. She said, "Oh, I thought I was dreaming, but up on the wall I saw a little boy with no eyes just there in a Spider-Man pose staring at me." That's when I freaked out and told her the story, for the first time, of when I saw what I guessed was the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years, still with the same girlfriend, and by this time we had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in my old bedroom at my parents' house. My daughter would wake up at the same time every night and start talking. For a while we thought it was a normal baby thing, until I noticed it was almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her one night who she was talking to every night. She responded, "A little boy, he talks to me, he's nice." He's lost and looking for his mommy. I told my mom what happened the next morning, and before I got to tell her what I thought, she said, I remember when that happened to you, then your girlfriend. I have no idea what that is by then, neither my girlfriend or I have seen the little boy after our first encounter, but my daughter continued her nightly conversations until we got our own place later that year. TL, doctor, daughter, girlfriend and I encounter same ghost 5 years apart. My old bedroom is probably haunted. My time to shine. Finally. An AskReddit question I can actually answer. So this was several years ago, when I was a total deadbeat and lived with my then girlfriend's parents. They had a tri-level house, with the basement that contained our living space and my girlfriend and I's bedroom. Upstairs was the living space for everyone else, the dining room, and kitchen. The third level had the master bedroom, and 2 additional bedrooms for my girlfriend's sisters. I was home alone one night, with her parents off with friends, my girlfriend at a friend's, and her sisters were at an all-night church thing. I elected to stay home and play WoW all night. Where my computer and desk sat, right above my head, was an AC vent. Often, I could hear her sister playing in her room from that vent. I was leveling my paladin or something when I heard laughing and giggling coming from the vent. Nobody was supposed to be home, so my heart picked up. I glanced at the clock on my computer, and it read 1:36 a.m. I remember this all very distinctly. I went to go investigate and headed upstairs. The way the landing sits is at the top of those stairs. You can turn left and either go upstairs or go into the kitchen. I climbed the second set of stairs and opened the first door on the left, which was her young sister's room, which is directly above the basement. Inside, I used the light of my phone to illuminate as best I could. I saw a small figure, what I assumed was a small girl wrapped in a white sheet in the center of the room. Q pants shitting. This figure, this young girl, stops playing with the dolls and slowly looks at me. It let out the most ear-shattering scream you can imagine. My skin crawls just thinking about it and my chest tightens just remembering it. I wish I could tell you what transpired, but I remember waking up at the bottom of the landing, right next to the door of the kitchen. I stumbled into the kitchen to get a drink of water and contemplate what the fuck just happened. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. The clock read 4:46 a.m. We never found the sheet the next day, but the dolls the figure was playing with were sitting in the middle of the room, away from the toy chest which they were inside of that afternoon when she cleaned her room, which is across the room. Edit, everyone is saying to turn on the light. That's all well and good, and I would have done that. However, the light in the room operated on a pull cord connected to a fan in the center of the room. Flicking the light switch would have done me no good. Edit 2. Someone said I should have taken photos of the ghost. Yes, I should have, since I had my phone. However, this phone was so old, it didn't have a camera. All it was used for was for calling people. Sorry I didn't get these edits earlier. I made the post and went to bed, and just got home from work. Edit 3, this one for you/the winged wheel. I mentioned this on another post, but I'll drop it here too. My mom was diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer in 2009. It was a struggle and the doctors didn't expect her to pull through, but she did like a champ. My mom is a fighter and, as she puts it, refused to let cancer kick her ass. Fast forward to 2012 and she decided to undergo reconstructive surgery. The surgery goes well and she is put into recovery. She spends a day drifting in and out of consciousness, which was expected after a surgery like that. The whole time she is still hooked up to a morphine drip to help her pain. After being reassured by the doctors that everything was fine, we decided to go to our homes and shower and sleep. My sister elects to stay just in case anything goes down. Fast forward to the next morning and my sister is calling me in tears saying I needed to get to the hospital right now. I rush up to the hospital and am pulled aside by the doctors and told that my mom has suffered some complications from the surgery and is a coma. A half hour goes by and my stepdad arrives, I live by myself closer to the hospital, and the doctors pull him and I into her room. They say that her lungs are filling with fluids at a fast rate. They say she is unlikely to recover and we need to make a decision to keep her on life support or pull the plug. We refused to let her go like that. 3 days go by and my mom starts showing some cognitive activity. By the end of the week she fully wakes up. The relevant part happens after she wakes up. She looks at my stepdad and I and asks when we came into the room. We tell her we've been here all week. She seemed really dumbfounded by this and replies she has only been in the room for a day or two. She then asks where her grandmother had gone. This creeped us out. My great-grandmother passed away in early 2007. When my stepdad tried to explain this to her, she replied that she had spent the last couple of days with her talking about the family. She said that grandma got really weird and told her that she can't give up because she had children to take care of. According to my mom, around the time grandma said this, mom became aware of us being in the room and grandma was gone. It was really weird to hear her talk about it. To this day she has no recollection of being in a coma. She knows she was now, but all she can remember is spending a few days in the hospital with my grandmother talking about the So, I was about 9 or 10. I went to my friend Allison's house. She and her parents were at her soccer game. Found out later. Her house was 3 lots down the street on the other side. The house had a 6-foot fence around the property, opening up to the driveway. Whenever she wasn't home I would just wait for her in the backyard. Her swing set was totally badass. So here I am swinging, waiting for Allison, having a great time. I am watching through their kitchen window, through the living room, and out the front window, hoping to see her or her parents walk up to the front door. Then I saw a dark slowly moving object/figure thing move across the front room. The next few seconds seemed to last years. I am no longer swinging. Still sitting on my favorite swing, I am no longer happy. Deathly still I watch this figure, holding my breath as it glides. No, no, no. The voice in my head shrieks as the pitch-black shadow stops. Panic is starting to set in my young mind. Hold perfectly still, I tell myself. Intently watching as the figure starts to turn towards me. I see no face or any detail, but I feel it as it faces me. Definitely male. Definitely full of hate. Every hair feels like it's standing on my head. Scared shitless and not able to move. I tell myself this can't be real. It's all some waking dream. The thing starts moving towards me. I let out a loud gasp-like scream. It's almost like I can feel its intention. I am frozen by the hate I can feel. I look past the door to the kitchen to the driveway. If that guy comes out of the door at me, I'll never make it past, I think. I look the other way towards the fence. That side doesn't open, but I can climb it. We always did to get to the field. I have never climbed it great, but I can. Looking back at the window, I see the shadow man slide right through the window. Ah, I scream as I run towards the field. Never looking back, I climb that fence the fastest I ever did. Falling off the top of the fence, I land on my back, jump up and run, as fast as I have in my life, back to my house. Upon entering my house, I run straight to my room and enter my closet. This is where I sat for the next 4 hours until my parents convinced me to come out and eat. To this day I still get chills when I recall that stuff. Heebie-jeebies. I have a few. We used to live in a house that was built in 1862, a gorgeous big Victorian house with 4 stories to it. The bottom floor had originally been the kitchen and scullery, but in the 1940s, it had been turned into a separate flat with its own front door. When we moved into the house in the 1980s, it had been returned into one big house, and we used the bottom floor as a playroom, with all our Cindy horses and stuff. My mom and dad put a piano in the playroom, and when I was around 14 years old I started to teach myself to play. No one liked the bottom floor, especially the back scullery, which was a dark room that looked out onto the backyard. It was dark, and cold and bloody scary. When I played the piano I used to know someone was watching me. I never got this feeling anywhere else, and a lot of times it didn't really bother me, as it didn't feel intrusive and I just continued to play. For some reason I knew it was a man in his 20s, and he was sad and also, not right. Not all there, or a bit off kilter, I don't know how to explain this. Sometimes when I played I got a really bad feeling and had to leave the piano and scarper up the stairs 2 at a time. Other times, it was fine, but I always knew someone was watching. Well, in my late teens we spoke to a previous owner, who said that the guy that rented the flat in the 40s and 50s was known to have committed suicide. I heard footsteps and the stairs creaking, although it was an old house, so it could have just been it settling down, this is what I told myself. And sometimes, we had an intercom from the front door, I heard an odd voice type noise coming from the intercom. Again, I suppose it could have been a malfunction. Those were the days when I screeched up the stairs and refused to play again. Anyway, I got quite good at the piano, but never liked that bottom floor. Whatever it was, is probably still there, scaring the crap out of the new owners. I didn't say anything at the sale of the house. Yes. When I was a kid, down the road from us lived the sweetest elderly couple on the planet. They were kind, loving, friendly. Just all around the most awesome people on the planet. I considered them a set of grandparents. Well, one day, I think it was 2004 or so. I was up late, bullshitting on the internet. It was just after midnight when I smelled something weird. My room smelled like cocoa butter lotion. I was like, WTF? I sniffed around for the source, and found nothing. I brought my mom up and she sniffed around and smelled it too. I shrugged and went back to gaming. The smell lingered for about 4 hours before finally disappearing. I didn't think anything of it until the next day. The elderly woman I mentioned died in her sleep that same night, shortly after midnight. And did I mention she loved cocoa butter lotion? 'Cause she fucking loved cocoa butter lotion, yeah. I think I was visited by a ghost. Well, that didn't end there because the smell returned the next night too. This time I knew what it was, so I started speaking to her, saying my goodbyes, thanked her for being around, etc. After a couple hours I went to bed and the smell was still there and it was really starting to freak me out. Eventually I snapped and told her to stop and go away because she was scaring me. Within a couple minutes the smell up and vanished. And I cried because it hit me that she was gone, and she came to see me and I yelled at her. Well, it still doesn't end there. A few years later, my uncle, who I later found out was my real father, who didn't want me, was dying of cancer, throat I think, and was in the hospital. Then one day shortly after he was admitted, I randomly smelled cocoa butter lotion again at about 4 p.m. It only stayed for about 2 minutes then disappeared, but I knew what it was. Half-hour later they call us and tell us that he died at 4 p.m. 1 week later, the night before the funeral, late at night I was trying to sleep and the smell came back again. I said out loud that I would see him again in the morning and the smell went away almost instantly. Not sure if it's related, but the next day my grandmother was admitted to the hospital with a possible heart attack. It wasn't, it was really bad heartburn. That was a fun thing to get a call for right after a funeral. About a year later, the elderly man I mentioned before, he died in his sleep, and I smelled it again that same night. It didn't stay long though and I was confused as to who it might be. Got the call the next day. He was a rather sad case. After his wife passed, it literally broke his mind. He was fine before it, but when she passed he went full-blown Alzheimer's. So anyway, I smell when people close to me die. They smell like cocoa butter lotion. Bonus side effect to this is I'm terrified of cocoa butter lotion now. Another one. When I was in 4th year, I was 13-14 years old. I have no idea what year that is in American schools, I went to a private convent school. One of the girls there was really nice, and I was invited to her house for an overnight stay. She lived in big 18th century hall in the northeast of England, miles away from anywhere. She had ponies, and I was really excited at the thought of staying over, and riding out. I didn't know at the time, her mom and dad were divorcing and he was also a nasty alcoholic. My friend had an older sister, who had been in trouble at school and was generally having a hard time, smoking, fighting etc., and the house had a real-life poltergeist. No one bloody told me that before I turned up, and I suppose I wouldn't have known what it was then. My mom and granny took me in the car. We drove up to the front of the house and sat there a moment, admiring the place. I always remember this. As we all heard something with big claws scratch down the side of the car. It sounds so weird, but it's honestly what we heard. Everyone was a bit oh my god. And looked out the car window, nothing there. When we got out, I did not want to get out, there were no scratches. I have no idea what it could have been. I asked my mom a while later what she thought and she weakly answered badger. But a badger wouldn't have gone up and scratched a car surely. There were no dogs outside, and the dogs they had were shut in puppy cages in the kitchen. I have no idea. The house did not have a nice feeling. It was pretty and made of a lovely gray stone with stone hounds on the gateposts, but when you walked in, it felt ominous. As a teenager I was aware that the atmosphere was very flat but didn't really think about it at the time. So we had dinner, went to see the horses etc. and generally mucked about. They had interconnecting doors, with little spaces inside. Do you know what I mean? So you would open one door, step up a step and then straight away open the next door. The space inside wasn't much more than a foot. Well, I opened the first door, went inside and then couldn't open the door in front of me, or the door behind. After a bit of frantically shaking the door and giving it a good kick, it finally flew open and I shot out into the next room. It had never stuck before and everyone crowded round to see what had happened. Later on that day we were in the garden, when someone started throwing pebbles at us. Thinking it was the older sister, we shouted for them to stop, but the pebbles kept going. They never hit us, just plopped around us on the front lawn. It looked as if they were being thrown from an upstairs window, but I couldn't see anyone doing it. And yes, when we went inside to complain, the sister was in the kitchen with her mom, and had been the whole time. I suppose she could have dashed around from the front to the back. The house was jolly cold, although all houses were then, and they couldn't keep their goldfish alive, the dogs wouldn't go into the front room, and all in all it wasn't a very nice place to sleep. My friend said that she used to see phantom dogs on the front lawn, running around and often heard footsteps in the attic. I had a nice weekend, went out for a ride, did a bit of shopping with my friend, and then went home again. In lower 6, my friend dropped out of school, she was really bright, and I lost touch. I never went back to the house, but I often wonder whether the strange things were still happening or whether they stopped when the family moved out. I was walking in the woods with a buddy of mine and we came to a pretty open area. There were multiple trails that branched off of the area, and we were deciding which one to take. My friend stopped me and claimed heard a rustling in the trees in one of the paths. He was being cautious because some deer can be aggressive where we live. I'm looking around for a deer or a bunny, but I see a pretty long and gray tail quickly wisp away down the trail. I thought maybe it could be a cat or something, so we shrugged it off and kept walking. After a few minutes of going down the trail, I heard a really loud crack to the left of us and holy shit. It was an all-gray bird, even the beak, about 5 to 6 feet tall with a tail. As soon as it made eye contact with us it shot so swiftly up in the air I thought it was levitating, and flew like a motherfucker in the opposite direction. I felt like I encountered a legendary Pokémon. It was truly amazing to witness something so weird. Oh boy. My mom's side of the family owns a decent amount of property in East Texas. Not hundreds of acres and fields or anything, but enough that a few members of the family live on it and everyone's got space. I lived there when I was in the 4th grade. Right next to our property, literally touching it, is a small church and a graveyard. Then, opposite of our property at the edge of this church, is more of our property. We basically surround it. This is because, my family having lived in Texas, my ancestors owned slaves. After the slaves were freed, my great-great-great-grandmother donated the land to her former slaves so that they'd have a school and a church. The school building is no longer used, but descendants of these slaves still attend the church every 3rd Wednesday. The school building was cluttered and had been locked with a lost key for about 40 years. Also, fun fact about the graveyard, almost half of the graves I shit you not have my first name somewhere on them. The name ran in the family and was passed on to the free slaves, and the church community buries everybody from the church there. You can imagine how terrifying that graveyard was to little me when I saw roaming loser everywhere. Anyways, school building. A friend and I, when we were little, thought it'd be too spooky to explore it. So on one night, we walked across the property, onto the church property, past the church, and to the small abandoned school building. The windows were dirty and dusty, and I distinctly remember that all I could see through the window was chairs and desks stacked on top of each other, rotting and deteriorated. We had to get in. Imagine the cool old things we'd find in there. But the door was locked. So, us being brilliant 4th graders, we first tried throwing rocks through the window. Unfortunately, we were prepubescent scrubs that would make even the worst of pithers roll in their graves, and gave up after a rock bounced off the window frame and hit my friend in the face. Next, we tried something daring, we threw rocks at the lock on the door. We gave that up pretty quickly too, our awful 10/9-year-old throwing arms having already made Jesus cry. There was only one thing left to do. Blow the front door the fuck up. After all, we had to see what was inside this old spooky school. So we went back across the property, into my grandfather's warehouse, where he keeps all his shit. Basically a giant tin barn, and found all of the fireworks. I had never lit fireworks before, so I let my friend, let's get personal and say his name was Daniel, pick out a truckload of firecrackers. We got some old matchbooks and went back across the property to the schoolhouse. Up until this point, the scariest thing had been the fact that we were roaming around the woods. Our property was in the middle of the piney forest country, with nobody but chubby selves. Seriously, wow, we were so fat. I remember on one of the walks during this ordeal we stopped to pick blackberries and stuff. Anyways, so, as dark as it was, the swaying trees and rustling bushes and howling coyotes were more nerve-wracking than anything. Up until we got to the school to execute Operation Cannot Possibly Fail. I still don't know how fireworks work, but I feel like it's a miracle we didn't start a fire. Daniel slipped a strand of the firecrackers down both of the handles, wrapped one along the fucking hinges, and laid the rest around the lock and handles. Then he just lit them and we ran far back to watch. Bam 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 bang 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 kapow bam bang, let's wake up the entire property whoppoo bam, fucking loudest brightest shit I'd ever seen in my life. We watched those firecrackers go off, and off, and off. And then the lights stopped, but there was still banging. The banging was different, then. It was rougher, it wasn't a pop anymore. No, the firecrackers had stopped, and they hadn't worked. The door was still very much shut. And it was shacking. It was loudly shuddering and creaking, trying to open, as if someone was slamming against it from the other side. Daniel and I took a while to see and understand, especially after disorientation from the fireworks and us being fat asthmatic fucks, what exactly was going on. But the door was definitely shaking loudly, and something was distinctly banging against it. Just as we both realized this and grabbed each other's flab for support, whatever was slamming against the door made a noise I'll never forget. I've heard bears and coyotes and hogs and wolves and mountain lions and weird-ass birds that shouldn't be in our area and pretty much anything under the animal rainbow. I had never heard this fucking Satan spawn noise before. The best way to describe it is like, you know those videos of animals trying to talk and sort of making words. I'm on mobile so I can't link, but it sounded like a mixture of that cat saying "Oh Long Johnson" and that dog saying "I love you." Seriously, look one or the other up. This noise was an unnatural drawl that sounded like a bear whose balls had not dropped. This noise was loud as fuck and accompanied the banging and rattling and shaking. My friend and I screamed and sprinted away when we heard this, crying from the sheer terror of the noise and the shaking door. We sprinted all the way back to my grandparents' house with only, like, 3 inhaler breaks. My grandparents were asleep, but my mom was down there and had actually been looking for us. My friend and I were pudgy bags of tears and fat flakes until we were comprehensible enough, after 30 minutes, to tell my mom there was something in schoolhouse at the church. She disregarded it and scolded us for leaving. Nonetheless, my grandfather asked permission of the church owners before we properly broke the door lock with a pair of those giant plier things. My uncle was standing ready with a shotgun in case it was a bear or something. There was nothing in there but cobwebs. To this day, and Daniel and I are still very close friends, no one will believe us about what happened that night. I'll never forget that fucking noise. Aw man, why can't I reach these threads in time? I was a campus security officer that worked night shifts by myself, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The college campus, like many campuses in the States, used to be a military fort. This one had been around since the Revolution, starting as a wooden fort, then in the Civil War was a granite block fort, then by World War I and World War II was an impressive dirt and concrete stronghold with massive artillery batteries and hidden tunnels crisscrossing the campus. It had a bloody past, with people dying from disease, and one guy being shot for mutiny. Many of the old brick buildings were still standing, including the old hospital, barracks, and officer's house. The hospital and barracks are now classrooms, while the officer's house was converted into a hotel where people could pay to stay, while students learn hosting, management, and drink mixing. Interesting program to say the least. Now, on night shift, you're alone. You have to go through all the 200-year-old buildings with nothing but a flashlight, phone, and a set of keys, since the college didn't want security to have mace or anything. If you find a dumbass doing hard drugs, hope you can dial the police in time. There's a story for another day. The hauntings, the hospital. One night someone left the lights on the top floor of the hospital. The hospital is only 4 stories tall, and there were lights on in other places too, so I just took the stairs. As I closed the stairwell door behind me and made my way up the stairs, I heard a man asking me a question. With the stairwell throwing the voice around, I couldn't make out what he asked. But I know it came from the basement. I went down and couldn't find anyone. No radios, signs of people, or anything. But it was very, very cold, and I felt dizzy. Looking back, I now realize what I was looking around in, and why nobody likes going down there. What do hospitals keep in the basement? The morgue. The hotel. The hotel was definitely the most haunted building. While you could hear voices and get chills in several other buildings, the hotel was one where people would actually see apparitions, and I was lucky enough to see one too. That building scares me to this day, and I haven't been there in years. Footsteps when you're the only one there, mumbling from the basement, dragging sounds. You name it. The worst one I remember is hearing a child laughing when I asked who was there. After making sure I was alone. Noped the fuck out. However, as scary as it was, I was and still am fascinated. I would keep going back. Sometimes I would be lucky and have another officer with me for the first couple hours of my shift. We'd go in, turn off the lights and make sure the doors are locked, then jokingly ask if there was anyone left inside. One night we got an answer. In the form of a dragging sound on the second floor and the sound of someone screaming, close and distant at the same time. Noped the fuck out too. One of my last shifts, I was going through the hotel as two workers were finishing cleaning up. They were both downstairs, one with me, the other in the basement. As I was finishing making sure the doors were locked so they could just leave and close the doors behind them, I looked up at the second floor banister above the lobby. In time to see what looked like a woman in a black skirt, dark stockings, and black heels walking from right to left. Without any sound. And straight into a wall, where she melded into the wall and vanished. You guys are the only ones here? Yeah. No guests tonight at all? Nope. Walked around, confirmed nobody else was there. Nope. Done. I'm out. And that's just the hotel and hospital. There are still the stories I have of shadows running across the graveyard. Yes, there's a graveyard on campus, a soldier staring at me from the top of the battlements, shadows dancing around the machinery in the welding shop, and voices calling to me from the darkness in other buildings. But those are stories for another day. This is probably buried and far too late anyway. Frown. So this probably sounds totally unbelievable but 100% true. I've written it before a couple times, so just did a copy-paste job. Excuse the horrible writing. I was about 15 at the time and my friend, James, had ridden his bike over to my house on a school night for a quick visit. It was pure daylight when James first turned up, and it was only the two of us and my older sister, about 18 at the time, at home. When James turned up, I heard the knock on the door and I eagerly opened it up to him, asking, "Dude, why is there an old woman in your front yard?" I looked behind him. Nothing. Must have just left. That's weird. We go on with our night and don't think anything of it. About an hour or two pass and my back door opens. It's just a normal old door, so if unlocked, wind is easily able to open it. My small dog runs in, shivering because it's freezing outside. I feel bad, but she's an absolute mess playing in the mud. Set up her kennel real quick outside to be good for her, pop her in, run back inside and close the door. It happens again. Must have not locked the door. Rinse and repeat, pop Monty in her kennel, lock the door, make absolute sure I lock it. Happens again. I'm just infuriated with my shitty quality door right now. Lock it. Doesn't happen again. After a few more hours, the two of us not thinking anything strange is happening just yet, James decides to leave. As we are walking to my door, it's about a 6 to 7 meter corridor, only a door at the end. I have a key in the knob with a bunch of keys hanging off it. The keys started to wildly swing. Again I pass it off as just wind. James though, not so much. He has to ride home in the pitch black, pissing down rain and unheard of winds. We get to the door and I put the keys to a straight stop from the crazy swing when James isn't looking. "Oh my god mate, they just stopped," I said. James is freaking out and looks away. I bash them to get them swinging again, and I mean really swinging. "What the fuck is happening?" I exclaim, trying to freak him out more. They came to a straight halt. I start freaking out at this point and immediately my phone rings. It's my mom. She doesn't even say hello. She starts by saying, "Strange question, but by any chance has weird stuff been happening at home?" Right now I'm thinking, shit, what's up? I tell her what's happening to me, and then mom tells me the first thing, which isn't too bad. "Well Linda," she started, "Mom's sister, she's been having little things at home. She has a barometer and the dial just got ripped off. Sean went to the garage to get a wrench to put it back on, and the transistor radio flew across the garage. I'm beginning to want James to not leave me just yet. He's bolted the barometer hand back on, and it got ripped right back off." Now mom goes on to her second part. The part that got me. Now I got a voicemail, didn't get a call, just straight to voicemail. Now before I go on about the voicemail, I never heard it, but she says it happened, and it deleted itself, and I believe her, because of the ending. Also, if relevant, we live in Australia and my mother's Irish, so anyone that calls normally has an Australian accent. It's kind of like a white noise with a really faint voice. My mother's mother has been passed away a little while at this point. It sounds like my mum singing a nursery rhyme she made up when we were children. Only her immediate family would know the words. No one is saying they did it. After a little while of my 15-year-old self freaking out to my mum on the phone, we finished the call. I come up with an idea. I was given a bookmark from my grandma's funeral when my mum went over for it, that had a photo of my granny and the date of her death. I showed it to James. "Dude, that's the woman who was on your front yard. It was her 5-year death anniversary that day." I had to do 24 hours of community service for some nonsense when I was 15. So I did it at a church. Mainly just doing shit off the janitorial staffs that should be done but no one wants to be doing it list, which I accomplished over the course of 3 days. The first day, I was down in the basement, cutting up soggy nasty carpet and transported up the stairs into the dumpster. There was so much carpet, I figured it was ruined from a water leak. Anyway, this basement looked creepy, but was actually the only place in the whole damn complex that felt relaxing. You had the creepy furnace, beetles running everywhere, and this weird door off in the corner where old jazz was playing from a radio and an old-time TV was making static noises. I didn't pay much attention to it cause I liked getting shit done, but occasionally while working, I kept hearing noises from the room, as if someone was in there doing something. The door looked so strange. It was just a bunch of old wood nailed together that was rotting away. Anyway, I was almost done with cleaning the basement, when I just said, "Fuck it." I beelined straight for that door, knocked on it, the people doing shit noises stopped and said, "Hello?" No answer, so I opened the door, and what's inside? Old-timey TV playing static, old-timey record player playing jazz, an old-ass metal cot, and that's it. I said whatever, went back to working, finished, and went home. The second day, my task was to move all the chairs for the choir or something like that back into the side rooms from the main auditorium hall because they just had an event the night before. So I'm doing the work, getting it done, started with getting these chairs onto the stage and then working them into the back rooms. Kept feeling like I was being watched, but whatever. On one of my trips from a back room to the stage, as I'm standing there, I look out to the pews, and there's this image of a fuzzy man near the back. That's the best I can describe it. Can't tell you what he was wearing, but it was like your eyes are in focus and there's this object from another frequency not focusing into view. I stop, and wave, and loudly say, "Ahoy there matey." I was 15, well the figure as best as I could tell started slowly sinking behind the backrest of the last pew. I figure it was someone pulling the whole elevator gag so I hop off the stage and beeline for it, get there, and there was nothing. I go back to work, a few hours later I'm just about finished. As I walk into the back room to stack that last chair, straight in front of me is an old man in a black trench coat with a western style hat peering out from this side wall at the end. I freeze, he doesn't look solid but I stack the last chair as I'm keeping eye contact, and in a blink of an eye it went from him peering to seeing his ass end go behind this side wall hallway thing. Again, fuck this. And I beeline after him. When I come around the corner of what I thought would be a hallway, is actually a staircase with a big metal door and a push latch with a sign above that says exit. I use the door, which is loud as fuck, and I get blasted with sunlight. Whatever. Third day, management isn't there, and I got to work with one of the regular janitors. This time I'm working with someone, old guy, athletic build, you can tell he's worked every damn day of his life. Anyway, we work for 2 hours, and after that, we just drink root beer and bullshit for the rest of the time there. I get to talking to him, and ask him if he's ever seen anything weird here. He laughed and asked, "What did you see?" I told him about the basement experience and he said that the janitorial staff believes that to be old Bill, he used to work at the church for the longest time. They'd keep the TV and the jazz on cause that's the way he would like it. As for the noises from that room in the basement, he said Bill would always be tinkering with things inside that room. I then tell him about my experience in the auditorium and he just responds with, "The man in black." After that, we go to the office and he tells the staff there that I saw the man in black, to which all these nice old ladies were very happy to hear. Someone outside the loop confirmed to them that they aren't crazy. Conclusion: So what did I see? Exactly what I said I saw. Is it paranormal? I don't think so. Personally, I believe it's all on the same frequency: past, present, the future, elevator up, elevator down, the void. It's all there, and even if what I saw were ghosts, why fear them? If they fuck with you, just kick their ass in the next existence. That's my thought on the matter. I don't really believe in most paranormal stuff. It interests me, but I am always highly skeptical of any such claims. For that reason, I don't often like telling this story because I feel that it kind of breaks my credibility as a rational mind. It just sounds too absurd. But I saw what I saw, whatever it was. So here it is. About 6 years ago, I had just moved to the southeastern United States. I loved it there. It was beautiful, and had such a deep, fascinating history. On this particular late afternoon, I was visiting an old plantation. It was extraordinarily place. Big mansion, massive grounds, and lots of great historical artifacts from the 1800s. Plus, it was the middle of the week in mid-fall, so the place wasn't crowded at all. I wandered off on my own to explore the grounds. There were lots of nice trees and plants, but my eye caught a strange path off at the edge of the property, and I decided to follow it. Alone. For this part, I'll use real photos of the place. Because it's a huge tourist spot and lots of photos exist online. I walked down the path to find this weird, almost cave-like structure. It was surrounded by fallen leaves and not nearly as beautiful as the rest of the property. I walked up the locked metal gate used as a door on this structure and looked in. It was completely empty. Such a big open space, I figured it had been used for storage or something. It was just incredibly dark and empty in there, especially as the late afternoon sun started to go down. That photo was definitely taken with a flash and slightly zoomed in. It was much darker in person and a bit deeper looking. The room also goes off a bit further on the left and right sides. At this moment, my stomach churned over as a strange figure appeared. It was vaguely human in shape. By that I mean it was human in height, had a distinctive head-to-body ratio, and had almost a walking-like movement to it. Though no clear limbs or anything, it was like someone had thrown a sheet over a person walking. You could see the movement but not the detail. It also seemed very out of focus compared to its surroundings. The most indescribable element of it was its color. It was a glowing blackness, despite that making no sense. It was almost illuminating the room in its vibrant blackness. I don't know how to describe it better than that. I believe it had a slight purple glow around the edges as well. It walked out of the shadows on the left side of the room, through the lit middle area, and into the shadows on the right side of the room. It took a few seconds. It wasn't gone in a flash. It was quick, but long enough for me to really stand there and get a good look. I stood there in shock, not because I was scared or because I thought it was a ghost, but because my mind just couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. In the few brief moments that I watched the figure, my mind raced to explain what it was. My first thought was that it was a shadow. But the way it moved and glowed, the way it was clearly standing in the middle of the room and not flat against a wall. All that disproved the shadow theory to me. My second, more likely, theory was that it was something that was wrong with my eye. Some sort of temporary blindness in the center of my vision. But if this were the case, the figure would be overlaid onto all that I was seeing. But it wasn't. This theory was disproved by the fact that I watched the figure clearly walk behind the columns seen in the photo. It moved behind the columns, in one side and out the other, just like if a person walking behind them. This gave the figure a real definitive position in the room. For this reason, I concluded that the figure was either something that was really in the room, or a hallucination, but an intelligent one. My brain specifically compensated for the figure's apparent pathway and adjusted my vision to see it move in and out of view as it was blocked by the columns, and by the bars of the gated door. When the figure vanished, I waited a moment and then turned and walked away to go find my family. I didn't run, but I walked quickly. As I was walking back up the path, I noticed a small sign covered in leaves. I walked over to it, brushed off the leaves, and read it. It turns out the strange cave-like structure that I had assumed was originally for storage was actually the family mausoleum. The bodies were relocated when the property was converted into a museum. Yes. Many times. TL, dear Rasa child, I lived in an old house across from a cemetery. Stuff happened all the time. The description below doesn't cover everything that happened. When I was in kindergarten, my parents moved us into a really old house. The main house was the office for a cemetery, but I remember an old lady still lived in the house. We used to go visit her sometimes. In the third, and newest of the houses, built in 1830, there was another family who had a couple of older daughters. The youngest daughter was my babysitter. This is an important fact, my mother worked as an ER nurse. So to start, we moved in and my parents left one specific bedroom untouched. She never explained why to us. One morning, my little brother, about 3 years old, went investigating in there. He came running out screaming, scared and in a cold sweat. He kept screaming. The old man yelled at me. As I turned to look into the room, the door slammed shut. Not like wind blew it shut, I mean like someone threw the door shut. No windows were open in the house, as it was winter. Every time we left the door open for even a second, it would be slammed closed. If my brother and I were playing too loudly, we would actually hear an old man yelling at us to be quiet. We told my mom, she shrugged her shoulders and told us to listen to him. This continued the whole time we were living there. My bedroom was huge, with a fireplace and 2 large closets on either side. I remember on many occasions, over several years, playing with another little girl in my room. Her name was Elizabeth, she was about my age, 6 to 7, and she always wore this black dress with long sleeves and a high collar. She wore a white bonnet-type head covering, had brown hair and blue eyes. She wore these black leather boots that laced up. My mom said she always heard me talking to someone while I was playing in there, but she never saw anyone with me. She thought it was an imaginary friend. This is, until we went for a walk through the children's section of the cemetery. I saw Elizabeth in the cemetery sitting on a gravestone. I pulled my mom's shirt, said, "Mommy, there's Elizabeth. Can we play?" When I turned around, she was gone. When we looked at the gravestone where she was sitting, the name was Elizabeth, who died at 6 years old. My mom realized then that my imaginary friend was probably a ghost. I never saw the girl again after we saw the gravestone. Then our first Christmas in the house, we left to go to church on Christmas Eve. House was locked, all the lights were off, we didn't have any pets. When we came home, there was a well-lit fire in the fireplace, all the Christmas lights were on, and all the candles my mom put out were lit. This happened every Christmas Eve when we left for church. My dad, though it was the old lady living in the mansion, as she was out landlord. Nope, wasn't her. When I was in 1st or 2nd grade, I distinctly remember having this dream where I could fly. Keep in mind, my bedroom was on the 2nd floor. A little boy said, "Let's fly to the playground." And off we went. I remember scooting out my window. I remember feeling the cold air, I remember playing on the playground with him. I remember flying back, and seeing my own body in the bed. I remember feeling the ceiling brush my head. And I remember floating back down into my body and going to sleep. I also remember not wanting to wake up the next morning, because I was so tired. There was also a lot of stuff moving around. Toys, books, shoes, you name it. And it seemed that there were always other kids in my room. When I told my babysitter about it, she said that was happening with her and her sister too. They were fighting a lot because things would go missing and they would blame each other. Oddly enough, I was never scared. Well, I was scared of making the old man mad, but that was it. I kept telling my parents what was going on. They knew, they were having a lot of the same experiences, hearing a lot of voices, etc. Then it all changed. In 3rd grade, I was waiting for my babysitter, the girl next door, to come over. She never came over. Years later, my mom and I were talking about it. She told me that my babysitter's dad had killed himself because he was hearing voices in his head. The summer after 3rd grade, I was outside playing and my babysitter came over and we were talking. We just spent time making jokes and swinging on the swings. When my mom got home, I told her that my babysitter had come over. She said that's impossible and left it at that. I was really confused. In the same conversation where she told me about my babysitter's dad, my mom told me that my babysitter had been killed in a car accident that day that I said we were playing. My mom was working in the ER when she came in. We moved to a different neighborhood just before I started 4th grade. No more experiences after we moved. Dad and I still talk about that house. He said after the deaths, they got worried that something would happen to one of us too. This is rather lengthy. I didn't realize how long it would be. I apologize for that, but I'm not able to summarize things well. About the time I was 17 or so, a few friends and I were out at the beach making dry ice bombs in the middle of the night. Probably midnight or so. We were quite delinquent back then. There were about 5 or 6 of us and we were just chillin' having a good time, trying to make potholes in the ground with dry ice bombs in the sand. It was a quite foggy night, which isn't too unusual considering I live on the northwest coast, Oregon, and it rains here 300 days out of the year. After 30 minutes or so of being rambunctious teenagers, we decide to walk down the beach a bit. After probably 10 to 15 minutes of walking, we hear a strange scratching/grinding sound, and stop and listen. Sooner than 20 seconds later, a tall figure emerges from the fog, adjacent to the ocean but between us and the ocean. Fucker had to be at least 8 foot tall, and it was dragging a chain. Not just your average chain, but like a fucking massive chain that looked like it was used for an anchor or something. The rings were probably 8 to 12 inches long a piece, and it looked like they had to be at least an inch in diameter as well. Now, this chain wasn't short by any means, it was probably 40 to 50 feet long, and this dude was just dragging it in the sand behind him. In the middle of the night. We all sat there silently and I got the biggest shiver down my spine and all my hair stood on end and my breath seemed to escape me. We gathered watching the figure cross our path and make its way up the beach. It and the chain slowly faded out of sight. Well, that was fucking creepy as hell, I thought. We then continued back down the beach, to a shipwreck called the Peter Iredale, which is all but eroded by now, and took in the cool sea spray and enjoy the ominous whooshing of the serene ocean waves. We toss a couple dry ice bombs into the water, and head back to our car, where we were parked probably half-mile up the shore. As we are walking, we hear that fucking noise again. My heart thumps and I get the cold sweats. It was that fucking thing again. Trudging that goddamned chain up the beach. It had to have been the exact same place where we saw it the first time. There were no drag marks in front of him, no footsteps, no indication that anyone had laid foot on the ground in front of him in the path it had previously walked. The sand was dry, and it wasn't washed over by waves or anything of the sort. We watch it for a moment, out of curiosity as to what the actual fuck is going on. We stood there dumbfounded, watching the figure trudge through the sand with this unfathomably massive chain dragging behind it. It stopped dragging the Satan chain, and stared directly at us, piercing our soul and the essence of our being. We stood there, jaw dropped, staring back at the shadowy figure. It begins to slowly march towards us, and we fucking book it through the sand. I have never ran so fast in my life. We all pile into the car, Ro turns the engine and we fucking floor it out of there, easily hitting 80 miles per hour on the straight stretch of the access road. Abso-fucking-lutely hauled serious ass out of there. The entire time I was staring out the back window of the car, some reason expecting it to Terminator after us and catch up to us. Thankfully it didn't, and I never saw the shadowy figure again. It was the strangest, most heart-wrenchingly terrifying thing I have ever experienced. None of us were on any drugs, we were all straight-edge kids clean as a whistle. Fucking shadow figures and their chains, scaring kids. Shame on them. A week or so later, a friend of ours who wasn't there with us that night, told me that people used to practice black magic in the dunes there, and that there were artifacts of demonology and inverted crosses scattered about. I called bullshit on his accusations of such occurrences. Turns out it was true. I went to the mom and asked her about it, and she said she had heard similar stories. So, naturally, we looked into it a bit and then went out to search for said black magic devil-worshipping sites. We were able to find some inverted crosses, which were made of some sort of metal that was all but rusted over, and concreted blocks, probably a cubic meter in size in a few different places, holes bored through them and metal rings inserted through them, as if to be an anchor point. I put 2 and 2 together and theorized that fucking chain was at one point connected to these blocks in the dunes, for Lord knows what purpose. I assume that creature was of black magic/demonology and will never set foot in those fucking god-forsaken cursed dunes of devilry again. TLD, Doctor, had an encounter with a demon dragging a Satan chain at the beach. Edit, turns out this is in the Oregon Ghost Stories book. Which is chilling to have witnessed it firsthand, when people have been seeing it for many years, my friend on Facebook tells me. My friend has the book too and it's in there. Spooky stuff. Oh boy, story time. This happened several years ago. I was a teenager at the time and my recollection of the events at hand is pretty good. I'm saying this since I see that a lot of answers come from people remembering stuff happening to them when they were kids. Anyway, in order to completely understand this story you need to know 2 very important things. The story is taking place in Southern Europe, where I am from, and it is a story that completely changed my view on life. It all begins with a small skin problem I had, warts. I've had them since I could remember. They were always located on my hands and always presented this terrible thing that I have that many other people don't. My confidence levels were okay, for a teenager at least, but I was always ashamed of my hands. I didn't feel comfortable showing my hands in public. I would get nervous holding my girlfriend by her hand. Shaking hands was somewhat of a trouble as well. Basically, you get the picture, hand warts are a pain. So, time goes by, and I realize I have to do something about this problem. Being a European, I have grown up enjoying 2 important things, free healthcare and absolute, total belief in science/medicine. So I go and visit a skin doctor. They schedule a treatment for me and I get on with it. Treatment included burning the warts with different types of medications, as well as application of different types of creams and powders. This had been going on for several months, but the warts would just simply not go away. Don't get me wrong, the creams and powders, as well as some other treatments they tried gave solid results, but only for a brief period of time. A week or 2 later, my warts would reappear and the whole conundrum would just start all over again. This has been going on for quite some time and at that point I started losing patience. So I decided to go and visit a private skin clinic. It cost me a ton of money but fuck it. I just had to deal with it since it was becoming unbearable. After several treatments at the clinic, the results were basically the same. Yes, they had better equipment, and fancier medicine, but the end result was always the same. The warts would come back. This was the moment when I was becoming desperate. It was also a moment when I started questioning science. How is it possible that we managed to send a man to the moon, yet we can't cure something as stupid as warts? At this point my private doctor told me that she knows a guy who deals with some sort of enchanting and that he knows these special techniques that can cure me in a day. I was super skeptical towards this. I completely shunned her story and went home. After a while I told my parents that the doctor mentioned this guy. He lives in a village close to my hometown. I also told them that I completely ignored it since I don't believe in magic and stuff like that. I was a well-educated, strong-minded individual and I could never believe in things that were scientifically unproven, religion included. Some time passes and my doctor somehow gets in touch with my parents and tells them about this guy. Long story short, my problem grew, and as I was becoming impatient and severely displeased with my hand's appearance, I sat down and had a small talk with my parents. We agreed that we would give this guy a chance. I was super desperate at this point, and I told myself, fuck it, I might as well have a good laugh at this random village guy and his shenanigans. We got in a car and went to the village where he lived. As we were approaching his house, we noticed many cars parked outside. Wow. This guy is kinda famous. Some of those cars were pretty fancy, I'd tell you. It was quite surprising seeing such nice cars in such a remote part of my country. We walked in and the guy looked completely normal. Just one of those random dudes that you see every day, a guy that would buy bread and milk every day at his local joint. You know, that regular guy. So he asked about my problem, I explain it to him in great detail, and he just silently nods his head. He then says that I have to follow him behind his house and that my parents should wait for me in front of the car. Of course, I was scared shitless at this point, but my parents gave me a reassuring look and I decided to follow the dude. I guess nothing that bad could have happened 50 meters from where my parents were standing. We walked slowly while he was smoking a cigarette. At one point he stopped. He pointed me towards himself, yet brought my hands slightly upwards. They were being directly shined upon by moonlight. He then told me to be quiet and not move. He grabbed my hands and started touching them very vaguely. I can't really explain it. Just like, barely touching them with the end of his fingers. He was whispering something in a language I could not understand. My feet were shaking. I honestly thought I was gonna shit my pants. This went on for about 30 seconds. In the end, he brought his head down and took a deep breath. He told me that I need to come tomorrow and the day after as well. I was dead silent. We proceeded back to my parents and our car. They had a small talk, and once they paid him, he only takes symbolic donations since his gift should be free for everyone, his words. We got in a car and drove ourselves home. I was dead silent the entire trip. What I had just experienced was completely otherworldly. Yet, I was still very skeptical. Finally, my parents asked me how it was. I explained them the entire thing in great detail and once again commented on it that the guy is probably a fraud. There was no way on earth that this would work. Regardless, I decided to give him a chance and agreed to go there 2 following days as well. Both days the routine was exactly the same. Go there, go behind his house, give him my hands, he whispers stuff for 30 seconds, moon shines, he finishes. All done. After my 3rd visit, he told me that I am now cured and that I should never have to worry about warts again. I was like, yay, right, I've heard that story before. He just said to follow the moon and never worry again. Heavy stuff, I tell you. We pay him and go back home. Couple of days passed and nothing changed. The warts were still there and I was as displeased as before. Hell, even more. This guy took our money for basically doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. On the 4th day, I think, I woke up having this weird feeling on my hands. The largest wart I had shrunk significantly. I swear. It was unbelievable. It looked completely different than what it did just 5 days ago. I immediately showed it to my parents and we were all shocked. Yet, it was still no time for celebration. Days went on and I kinda stopped thinking about it, had a pretty important semester at school at that point. I would check every couple of hours or so, but didn't really bang my head around it. Approximately 10 days after the visit, all of the smaller warts that I had on my fingers were gone. It was a fucking miracle, I tell you. I have never, ever experienced anything like that. I have never even seen anything like that. Long story short, 20 days after, all of my medium warts were gone as well, and my 2 biggest ones were reduced to a size of something you wouldn't even consider a wart. A month later my hands were clean and looked like those of a piano artist. Today, more than 7 years later, I still have no warts whatsoever. I have no idea what that guy did. I don't know whether it was magic or something else. But this is by far the biggest paranormal experience I had, and I must say that it made me broaden my horizons extensively about what folklore and old tales say. I would be more than happy to answer any questions if you guys have them. I've told this story numerous times, and every time I tell it people are in complete awe. You usually hear about stories like this, but it is quite rare to hear it from someone who experienced it firsthand. Reposting once again. Sorry if this all sounds familiar. I am from Finland, and that's also where these things I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone/GPS era. It was the end of the summer and myself and two friends were on a camping trip way up in the north, in Lapland. The mosquito season was over, and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The three of us had packed food and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left at the parking lot of a visitor center. This happened within the premises of the Urho Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forest of spruce and pine and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon, and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You can run into a bear or a wolverine in this place, but of course normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travelers free of charge. The trip had lasted 5 days. We were at the furthest of any kind of civilization we were going to be on that particular outing, truly in the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. There are no villages, towns or industry. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happened from time to time. You'd see some people in the distance maybe. Very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So, in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing, woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark. We had eaten our evening meal and all three of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped, but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging some jokes and crude humor in the dark, like guys in their 20s do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down we began to hear it, talking. And the sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us? We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was a human voice, no doubt about it. But nothing really could explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank, something big, powerful, and really not too far away. Combined with the sound of talking, we thought construction yard. But at that time of night, in an unpopulated, protected nature reserve? We got out of our tent. It was cold and pitch black. The campfire had some coals still glowing. We took out our flashlights. My two buddies have always been a lot braver than me. The sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometer away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything. We still could not make out what was being said. The speaking-like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible even to say what language was being used. Still sounded a lot like a person speaking though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of hearing a human voice in static? Maybe you've used a blow dryer and been sure someone is talking, turn it off and it was just something the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was sort of like that, it's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating/adding power, at times at idle. My two friends resolved to go find out what was going on. We put our warm clothes back on, donned boots, and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it. I would stay at camp while my buddies left to check out this mystery construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So, there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass heading and left, and I could hear them make their way through the forest, see the light from their flashlights. Then they were gone. The weird sounds continued, unaltered. They were gone 15 minutes, then maybe 30. Then the better part of an hour. It was odd, judging by the volume of the sound. They should have reached it, checked it out, and been back already. I added more firewood, and tried to make out what the person talking was saying, but it was too tinny and obscure. The guys had been away for over 2 hours. I figured they had stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something. Then the sound stopped. Just like that. It just ended, all at the same time. The engine sound and the voice both just quit. It was very silent. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something had happened, that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try to find them? I shouted their names several times, and built the fire pretty big. I was scared shitless when suddenly I saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp, out of breath. They told me the following: they had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop every now and then, be quiet and listen to it to be able to walk towards it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, then realized they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to go just a bit further several times, when suddenly the sound just stopped, like someone pressed a button on a recording. They realized they had been going on for a long time. They were in the middle of the dark woods, alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually they saw my big-ass fire from the top of a hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seemed to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone 2,5 hours in total. They said the sound stopped at around the 1 hour 15 minutes mark after they left. They then started to head back immediately, return trip taking a bit longer even though they kept a good pace. They apparently wandered around a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2-hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We did not sleep that night. Nothing more happened on the trip, and we never found out what the weird construction yard-like sound was about. When we returned to the park's visitor center some 5 days later, we asked around, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole national park area. Been bugging me ever since. About the place this happened in case anyone is interested, Urho Kekkonen National Park. Had to make an account just for this. About 10 years ago I was at a house party in a very small, isolated town that more or less consisted of 20 houses and a playground. Myself and a few friends were drinking at pretty impressive level, considering our ages, but the atmosphere was quite subdued and we ended up in one of those moods where we've got do something. After a, probably unwelcome, search of the host's garage, we found an old game that some people might remember, Sega Lock-On. This game was basically a commercial laser tag kit. Each set was a 2-player game, 2 guns, and 2 visors. The hit sensor was encompassed in this headset/visor with a red LED display showing your lives. We immediately knew we had to play it, though we quickly found that one of the headsets was broken. Working around the problem in a fairly cruel adolescent way, we resolved that the game would become a hunt, rather than a fight. 2 people carried guns, I was in this role, a third person wore the headset and had to evade the other players. With the rules established, the 3 of us made our way to the town's playground, which at this time of night was lit only by virtue of the nearby road. When we reached the park, my friend in the headset bolted off into a field, leaving me and another friend to bide the time while we gave him a head start. We got carried away chatting about something, and by the time we got looking our alcohol-shortened attention spans had moved on to something else. But we stumbled around the park anyway, not seeing much in the dark. On the edge of the park was a small wooden cabin, whose purpose can only be speculated as a sheltered place to watch football games from. It had a single entrance, and an opening in the front from which to, probably, view the rest of the park. As we walked by this, me and my friend heard a shuffling, scuffing noise from the cabin. Our conversation vanished and we advanced on the building. The inside of the cabin was partially lit by street light, coming in through the door at an odd angle that left the corners unlit. In the dark of the back corner we saw our friend, and we began drunkenly firing our AA-operated handguns. We pressed forward as we fired, and saw our friend crouch down for cover, reproducing the same sound as we previously heard. We fired and fired, but never once heard the ringing alarm sound that is generated by a successful hit. At this point, the angle from which the street light entered the cabin appeared to shift, drifting toward the corner, illuminating it. As it did so, the crouched figure that we'd been firing at, wilted. It closed up on itself like a ball, still maintaining the features of our friend. Kind of like when you see a ball of newspaper burn, its form shrivels, but you can still make out all of the folds. By this point, both myself and my friend had stopped shooting. From my perspective, it was because I could now see that this person didn't have the red LED display of the headset. The light continued to arc across the back of the cabin, until it completely lit the corner. We watched whatever had been in there melt away into the floor. My friend and I turned to each other for a moment, and then we both ran. We got back to the street and stopped directly under the nearest street light. For a while we said nothing, completely unwilling to explore the idea any further. But it was inevitable that we talk about it. I was dying to hear that he'd seen a different thing than I did, and he had hoped the same. Ultimately, we had both experienced the same visual and auditory hallucinations. We were drunk, definitely, but I've been drunk plenty since and never seen the glow of a street lamp wander like a lighthouse beam. And I've never seen a shadow in corner that looked like a moving person, let alone one that's the spitting image of a particular friend. When we finally calmed down enough to get back to the party, we found out that the guy we were hunting, being a resident of this town, had known a shortcut out of the park, and had been back at this house laughing at us before we finished counting up a head start. I've had 3 occurrences that wigged me out when they occurred. The first thing that happened. I was living in a house that had vaulted ceilings and a sitting room of sorts with large windows. There was a road that curved just before our house, so it wouldn't be unusual for headlights to fill the room at night. I had a friend over and his mom was coming to pick him up. We had finished watching our movie, or whatever it was we were doing, and were sitting in that room waiting. We were sitting on a couch with our backs to the windows when I saw a bit of light above us. I looked out the window, expecting it to be his mom. Nothing strange, but nothing alarming. Then it happened again. I turned and looked out the windows again. No car, and my friend says you saw that, too. We both look up at the same time and there's a ball of light dancing around the ceiling. Needless to say, we hauled ass out of there. The second thing that happened. My stepfather was a heavy snorer and my mother a light sleeper. Because of this, I made a deal with my stepfather that we could switch off who was sleeping in my bed and who was sleeping on the couch. I liked it because it meant I was able to stay up real late watching HBO, insert winky face. I specifically remember watching Blade 2 before turning off the TV one night. I saw a weird spot of light on the wall, but I didn't think much of it. You see, that room with the vaulted ceilings also had a large mirror on one wall. If a car had been sitting outside, the light could reflect off the mirror and go all the way into the room I was in now. This is what I assumed the light was, and I ignored it for some time. After turning the TV off, I noticed the light was still there. This was maybe after 30 minutes or so. For whatever reason, I thought it looked like a piece of paper pinned to the wall. It began to weird me out, so I took a pillow and kind of swung it between the wall and where the light was supposedly coming from, to test if it was a reflection. I don't know. The best way to describe what happened is this: you know, if you have something drawn on a whiteboard and you wipe it away with an eraser? Think that, but the shadow of the pillow was the eraser. It didn't disappear at once, but rather was wiped away. The third, and creepiest, thing. I was friends with a few guys in a youth group called Young Life. It's a pretty popular thing, as far as I know. Some local wealthy people supported the local group and would often let us come and do activities on their vast property. This night, one guy had a lot of property with a massive orchard and was allowing us to play a game of flashlight tag, essentially hide and seek with a flashlight. For safety reasons, we were meant to be partnered up with someone else. My partner and I were one of two groups of seekers and everyone went and hid. After a minute or two, we looked for them. We were fairly deep into the orchard. There was a road and a jeep that we had come in on at the edge of the orchard, when we heard a shuffle about 20 feet in front of us. We tried to be sneaky and he turned the flashlight off. I didn't have one, he did. That's when my friend, Matt, who was partnered with another Matt, jumped out of a bush and ran towards the road/jeep. My partner says stay here and catch Matt, while he chased after the other Matt with the flashlight. I kept hearing shuffling, so I inched closer. Matt? Come on, man. Come out. Then I heard a twig snap directly behind me, just like in the movies. I turned around expecting my friend. At first I thought I was looking at a stump, maybe 3 or 3.5 feet tall. It creeped me out though. Something wasn't right. Then I realized it had eyes. It was looking at me and there was moonlight reflecting off its eyes. Maybe a raccoon? I tried to rationalize what I was looking at, but I couldn't. It was short, stubby, had eyes, and that was it. I freaked out and ran back to the jeep. I waited there with Matt, who apparently was caught by my partner, and my partner until the Young Life leader came back. Guys, I want to take a second to pray. Okay. Why? What's up? He looked pretty shaken up. We were crossing that path over there and this thing, about this tall, he held his hand up about 3 or 4 feet, ran right in front of us. Okay, might be a bit long but here I go. When we were younger, about 13 or so, me and 3 friends were goofing off after school as usual, riding our bikes and just doing what young teens do. We eventually rode past the old abandoned house that's local for us, which has basically been there since we can remember. My friend's parents who were here since the 70s can remember that house been abandoned since then also. Anyhow, we rode past it per usual and decided to go a bit closer because we were always curious. As we approached it we saw, or rather thought we saw, someone peeking through the curtains. As curious teenagers we naturally go closer to inspect. As we got closer the curtains kind of drew back and the figure disappeared. Stumped, we decided to approach the veranda, and that's when we heard a baby crying. The crying slowly progressed into wailing and eventually one friend had enough and knocked to see if anyone was home. After about 5 minutes of knocking and continued wailing, the door finally opened. It was a little lady, looked to be about 40 or so. My friend asked if everything was okay, and if the baby was fine, and the lady simply said to us, "Go away." The friend continued to ask if she needed any help or if everything was okay, and she simply continued to reply, "Go away." This continued on for roughly a minute till she closed the door on us, and the wailing became even louder. At this point everyone in my head was screaming, "Run you dumb shit," but rather my friend decided to knock again in fear the child was being neglected. Eventually after a few knocks the door just kind of opened, not scary creaking open but rather it was left unlocked. We, as dumb teenagers, walked in to see if everything was okay, and partly due to curiosity. As all 4 of us walked in, the crying stopped and we stood in this abandoned house covered in dust and everything was covered like it hadn't been inhabited in decades. We took a few steps forward and the crying began again. By this point we decided we needed to find the child, so me and a friend went upstairs whilst the other 2 investigated downstairs. As we climbed the stairs the crying got louder and louder, and we continued to search each room slowly. Eventually we reached the last room, and it was apparent the cod was in here, so we opened the door and investigated. The first thing we both noticed was this room had nothing in it except for a baby carriage in the far left corner near the window. The crying was from there, It was clear as day. We made our way to it and peeked over to find nothing, but the crying was still there. From this carriage, my head started spinning and I didn't know what to feel. I called out for my friends downstairs and they ran upstairs and saw, or rather didn't see, what we couldn't see. They filled us into what they saw downstairs, which was the woman walking into the kitchen downstairs, in which they followed, and then she disappeared. We all knew that this whole situation was fucked and ran quickly to the front door. As we got onto our bikes we looked back to see the door being closed slowly by someone and then locked. A few moments later the curtains were pulled back by a woman holding a child. Smiling. We rode hard and fast back home and didn't turn back. Didn't sleep much for a few days. A few years after the house got demolished, but people began seeing a woman holding a baby at the local park and bridge. That is, when you didn't see the kid who drowned in the sewers nearby. I hated that area and was so glad when I moved and sometimes I drive past it at night and it just has the worst feel. It's always too quiet and it still scares me 11 years later. Put on your grammar forgiveness hat and have a read. I live in a small town in Michigan. It's a quiet town of about 5,000 people with a decent mix of woods, city, and country. Ever since I can remember, I've heard stories about Morrow Road, a road roughly 3 or 4 miles from my house. The legend says, and this is all over the interwebs, a mother loses her baby, kidnapped, wandered away, a few different variations, and dies in the process of searching for her baby. To this very day she wanders the woods surrounding the road, but more particularly, the legend says she haunts the Morrow Road Bridge. I've known this story growing up, and have been fascinated with it since I heard it. Before I was born, the bridge in question was packed down, and the half of the dirt road it was on was paved over. The other half, still dirt, has its own small bridge that newcomers go to for lack of better knowledge. In high school, my friend got his first car. One of our cheapest thrills was going out to Morrow Road. Our first time we tried the traditional park on the bridge, honk your horn 3 times and put your keys on the roof of the car, and some old bitch comes and rapes your face trick that was so popular to the evolution of the story. A couple weekends with no success and we decided to try a different spot. We found a clearing roughly 150 x 150, 42 degrees 39 minutes and 4.46 seconds north, 82 degrees 34 minutes and 32.73 seconds west. We decided since it was not near a house, and we could park off the road a bit, that we would stay there. Friday night again proved nothing, so we packed up and hit the road at about 12:30 a.m. Saturday night, we set off late, and it was roughly 2:30 when we arrived. We sat in our normal spot, listening, waiting. Windows down, quiet, looking around. We sat until roughly 3:30, entertaining ourselves with "Did you hear that? What was that?" when to our surprise, we hear the unmistakable sound of a baby's cry in the woods, pretty close to the road on the side opposite of the clearing. We were gone. We could not believe what we had heard. And we also noted, it was 3 a.m. We went back again and again, through the week, and we saw or heard virtually nothing out of the ordinary unless it was between 3 to 4. We laid off of the road for a year or so. He started college and only came home on the weekends, and I started a full-time job, so our trips were few and far between. A house had begun construction on the site where we liked to sit, and knowing that spot, I began to hear about all the mysterious setbacks the project had suffered. With new construction torn apart the next morning, a water heater explosion, and a couple other incidents I can't remember. The house was finally constructed, and the new family that had it built had moved in. If only for a while. Never did know the family that had moved in, but I do know. They were only there for roughly 6 months. By this time, I had a shift change and I was able to hang out on the weekends as late as I wanted. We started going to Morrow Road again, and we had our system down. We'd leave at 3 a.m., sit at the clearing in front of the abandoned house and wait. First night out, I had a video camera, back in the day when they took those little tapes that you needed a VCR adapter for, and we recorded out of my passenger window, facing the clearing, with night vision on. We had thought we caught nothing, until we reviewed the tape at home. What we caught was a shadow, like smoke, blowing into the middle of the frame. Our jaws dropped as it formed into a humanoid figure, and stood still looking at us, and blew away as it had come in. The whole thing took about 5 seconds. My buddy said to me, "We're idiots." I looked at him sideways thinking, idiots? Are you watching the? I mean, you saw the? With the staring, he said you were breathing on the window. We kind of had a quick laugh, until I said, my window was all the way down so I could listen. He had the video until a few years ago. His hard drive crashed. Total bummer, but all of our friends had seen it anyways, so no big deal. We had been out to the road about 10 more times, each with very weird things I don't care to explain. Like the white noise saying his name as we turned off of the road to go home. One of the last times we went was by far the most eventful. It's a regular night as usual. We started off at a mutual crush's house, that bastard, talking and hanging out with her and her brother. We get to the topic of Morrow Road, and her brother jumps at the chance to go with us. We wait a couple hours until 3, and head out to the spot. As we sit in front of the abandoned house looking into the clearing, I see a green humanoid blob pacing in front of the house from side to side. Thinking it was my eyes adjusting, I didn't say anything until it was said for me. You guys see the green blob going back and forth? We both agreed with our eyes fixed on it. We watch for a few more seconds and the blob starts making its way slowly towards the car. We realize what's happening and start yelling to get the hell out of there. Though we really didn't need to, as the driver saw it walking towards us too. Once the car started, the blob started flying toward the car, like a Kenyan in full sprint. As we spun the tires and pulled away, the blob got to what I would say about 10 of the car. We all saw a human figure. My buddy in the seat in front of me on the same side of the car said it looked as if it was wearing gown. The blob followed us about 15 down the road and disappeared. I watched behind us as it did so. That was one of our last trips to the road. And I'll never doubt the existence of ghosts.